Hi everyone, it is Kendall here for the 6th week of our Brackman mystery blocks. We've done 5 so far, past the original 12, so technically we're on week 18, but it is block number 6 of our new series of 12. Let's get that wheel spinning and see what it has in store for us this week. Brackman ID 1626 gives us the Doris Delight block, which appeared in the Farm Journal, and this was a periodical that was established in March of 1877. Over the years, they absorbed at least 3 other pattern sources, including The Country Gentleman, The Farmer's Wife, and The Household Journal. In the 20th century, they have been offered by mail order and booklets. Some of the patterns from this time have appeared in Rachel Martin's Modern Patchwork, which was distributed by Countryside Press of Philadelphia in the 1970s. Just like the Unknown block from a couple of weeks ago, this is a reject, but you could do it with the skills that I taught you in that video. But for today, we're going to respin the wheel and pick another block. Brackman ID 1635 gives us the Mystery Flower Garden. This was by Aunt Martha Studios. Booklets, kits, and related items are still offered by Kansas City's Colonial Patterns Incorporated. That began in the early 1930s when they were advertised in a syndicated column under various names, including Aunt Ellen, Aunt Matilda, Betsy Ross, Royal Neighbour, and Colonial Quilt. Aunt Martha was the most common name used. In 1935, Colonial Patterns began the Work Basket magazine, duplicating many Aunt Martha designs. In 1949, Colonial Patterns and Work Basket Quilts split company. Now, I did change this one up a little bit in that I have made each of the corners a solid half square triangle, as opposed to the pieced half square triangles that you see there using the quarter squares, just to keep it a little bit simpler, and I think the result is still just as fantastic. The truth behind this is I had trouble picking all the different colors to make up those segmented corners, so I thought, you know what, I'm just going to do this all out of one print, and I'm sure that Aunt Martha won't mind. So on the table in front of me are all the pieces that we need to make this block, which are included in the cutting directions linked in the description box below and over at the Facebook group Kendall's Quilting Corner. You will notice that beside shapes A and D, I have the little indication there that you should cut these twice on the diagonal, but we're not going to do that in this example, as I'm going to show you the 2 at a time method as I have done in the past, rather than piecing those units from the individual quarter square triangles. But to begin this one, we're going to take our pieces B and E, and we're going to make the half square triangles that go in the 4 corners of this block. And to do that, we draw a diagonal line on the wrong side of our B squares, which in this instance are background fabric. We then match these right sides together with our E squares and stitch 1/4 inch on each side of that drawn line. Once we have this stitching done, as you may be aware, I like to give them a press first to settle those stitches down and ease any stretching that has been caused by stitching across the bias, before cutting them in half along that drawn line and then pressing them all to the darker of the 2 fabrics. now going to trim these units down to their final size of 4.5 inches unfinished. And I like to do that 2 at a time by stacking them up and making sure that I've got that seam allowance there nested really nice and snugly. I then take my 6.5 inch square ruler that you can see there, and I place the 45-degree line from that ruler on the stitching line. We then need to make sure that there is enough fabric underneath the ruler and outside the ruler to achieve our trim down measurement of 4.5 inches before trimming away the first 2 sides. You then very carefully turn this around. You could use a rotating mat. I just always forget that I own one. Line up your 4.5 inches on those freshly cut sides and trim the final 2 sides. As I indicated in the beginning, for our A and D squares, you could have these cut into their quarter square triangles and piece these blocks individually, but we're going to do them the 2 at a time method, which starts off exactly like the half square triangles. So we're going to draw a diagonal line in one direction only on our background squares, match them up right sides together, and stitch 1/4 inch on each side of our drawn line. We'll then give these a press, trim them in half on that drawn line, and then press everything to the darker of the 2 fabrics, and it's at that point that we're going to take a different step. Now that we have it to this stage, this is where for half square triangles we would normally trim them down, but we're not going to do that. And I do actually mess up my directional fabric here, which is why I haven't been talking about it. We needed the patterns here to go in different directions, not the same direction. Anyway, that's all beside the point. So we're still going to nest this together really snugly as if we were going to use my 2 at a time trim down method. And I like to leave that seam allowance poking up towards the top so that when we feed this through the machine, those feed dogs and the pressure from the presser foot help secure this intersection nice and snugly. And we're going to once again draw a diagonal line now across these and then take them to the machine and stitch our 1/4 inch on each side of this drawn line. We'll then once again give those a press before cutting them in half on that drawn line, and I'll meet you back when that's done. With these 1/4 square units now done, we just need to press them, and sometimes I spin these intersections even though you don't really need to. But in this instance, I'm just picking a direction and pressing, and once we've pressed all of these, we will get ready to trim them down. Trimming these 1/4 square units does use a few steps, and you need to think about what it is that you're doing, but once you get the hang of it, it is quite simple. First of all, we're going to find our 45-degree line on our ruler and take note of where the 2 1/4 inch mark is. We need a final trim down measurement of 4.5 inches unfinished, so that 2 1/4 inch mark puts us in the center of the block. With our line, our 45-degree line going along our seam line, we then just check in the top left hand and the bottom right hand corners to make sure that our 4.5 inch indications are coming across those seams. If they're close but not right on, that's fine. Do not stress too much about it and trim those first 2 sides away. We can then just rotate this around and place our 4.5 inches on those freshly cut sides, making sure that our diagonal is still on our seam lines, and trim those final 2 sides. And once again, you should notice that the 2.25 inch mark is hitting the center of the square. Now that we do have all of the units needed to finish this block, we just simply have to refer back to our diagram on our cutting sheet for the layout of our quarter square triangle blocks. If you basically remember that the print fabric must touch that center square as we go around the block, you won't have a problem. You'll also notice that because I didn't really pay enough attention with my directional fabric and I got that a bit wrong, that my fabrics are going in different directions on my quarter square units, but you know what? In the end, I decided that I'm okay with that. We then just place our half square triangles in the corners with that print fabric pointing, not pressing, in towards the center of the block, and then we can put this together using our 9-patch construction, which is sewing all of our vertical seams and then our horizontal seams. On this one, we will press out towards those corners on the top and the bottom row and in towards that center solid square on the middle row. With that first horizontal seam now sewn, because we do have quite a little bit of fabric coming together in these intersections, I am going to open those up and spin the seam allowances in whichever direction they choose to go. Generally on one side it's always clockwise and on the other side it's anti-clockwise. Now to do that, we just need to pick out the few stitches that are outside the horizontal seam that we just sewed. And then we can open that up and spin our seam allowances all in that same direction as you see me doing here. Sometimes you do need to pick out a few more little stitches that are catching that on the inside. We can just open both of those up and spin them around, and what that does is it just distributes the bulk from those little intersections a little bit more evenly, and then we can press them into place. We'll do our other horizontal seam and repeat this exact same action to those intersections, and this block for this week is done, but stay tuned for the AccuQuilt and some fun layouts. So it is possible to make this block with your AccuQuilt. If you have the 8-inch mix and match cube, you will get the 12.5 unfinished block that we're aiming for. I don't own that one, so I am using my 6-inch mix and match cube, which will give me a 9-inch finished block. And for this block we need shapes 1, 3 and 4. 1 will give us the square that goes in the center, 3 will give us our half square triangles, and shape number 4 will give us our quarter square triangles. Once again, remembering all the tips I've told you before about placing the lengthwise grain towards the roller as you're rolling it through to prevent stretching and to get more accurate cutting. When I am piecing these together, again, I do press my seams open, and that's because I find that the AccuQuilt is very scant in the 1/4 inch that they allow, and by pressing them open I have no take up of the cloth or the fold of the cloth when I'm pressing to one direction or towards the darker of the two fabrics. It's just what I find works best for me. You do what works for you. So I'll get all of these shapes cut out and fast forward through the construction, as it is primarily the same as what we've just watched. As this block is symmetrical, nothing magic really happens once you put it on repeat, but here is what that would look like, and you could add some sashing and cornerstones just so that you're not trying to meet all of those intersections together. The first one that we rejected, however, and if you applied the techniques from that video 2 weeks ago you could make, looks like this on repeat, which once again gives that illusion of curved piecing without there being any. And I just changed the color of some of the elements here, and to me this looks very close to a Storm at Sea. So I would say it is Storm at Sea adjacent. And as always, you could just add some sashing and cornerstones to separate those blocks out and not have any seams to match up or nest. Well, what did you think of this week's blocks? I hope you found them as interesting as I did, and I have some good news. My fabric finally arrived from the wholesaler, so I'll be able to go back making my 9-inch green blocks in the upcoming videos. I think over the Christmas period, we will be taking next Saturday off, so the weekend in between Christmas and New Year's, and I'll be back on board in the first Saturday in January. Stay tuned to the Facebook group and the YouTube community page for updates on when, where, how, and why, and perhaps even with whomst. I hope you all really have a fantastic holiday period, and I look forward to seeing you all again in the new year. Bye for now.